Now, even if you're not the biggest Amiga fan in the world, if you're all into retro gaming, you're probably familiar with the Amiga CD32 console, as this machine has become kind of infamous in recent years, probably thanks to several well-known YouTubers who've made, shall we say, not so complimentary videos about this console. But I've personally got quite a soft spot for the CD32, having owned my machine since the mid-90s, and I've made several videos on this channel over the years, showing upgrades and games, and even getting this machine connected to the internet. But today, I thought I'd give it quite the challenge. Can we watch YouTube videos on this console that was made 30 years ago, all the way back in 1993, more than a full decade before YouTube itself was even launched? Now, of course, today, watching YouTube on a console is very straightforward, something we probably take for granted. There's YouTube apps for pretty much all the modern consoles. Even the Nintendo Switch has only really got one non-game application, and that's YouTube. It's everywhere today, but watching any kind of video content on a console in the early 90s was a bit more complex. At the start of the decade, we started to see rudimentary video formats being introduced with the rise of the CD-ROM medium, and actually Commodore, who would go on to make the Amiga CD32 console, were one of the first to market with their previous CD-TV home multimedia system. And with the CD-TV, they introduced the world's first streaming video format for CD-ROM, and it was called CDXL. And this was designed to stream video from a very basic single-speed CD-ROM on a 7 MHz Amiga with 1 MB of memory. And for the time, this was pretty jaw-dropping, streaming video from a 150k a second CD-ROM. The highest resolution it could handle was about 160 by 140 pixels, which means it was about a quarter screen video. Now, obviously, this doesn't look very impressive today, but actually it compared pretty favourably to other systems that were on the market at the time, like the Sega Mega CD. And by the time the Amiga CD32 console came out in 1993, with its souped-up AGA chipset with more colours and a double-speed CD-ROM drive, the CDXL format was enhanced to support more colours and a higher screen resolution. And it is with this outdated and quite niche outside of Amiga Circles format that today we can use CDXL to watch YouTube videos on this 30-year-old system. Now, of course, to watch YouTube, we need to be connected to the internet, and my CD32 is actually expanded with one of the modern Terrible Fire expansion cards, and I've done entire videos about this card before, but it gives it a nice spec bump over a stock system. But actually, in many ways, it is still quite faithful to the time period. In terms of the CPU that I've got in here, that is a Motorola 68030 from 1987, running at a massive 25 megahertz, and it's got a bit more RAM than you probably would have had back in the day, 128 megabytes of memory on board. That would have been very expensive back in the early 90s. There's also an IDE hard disk interface on here, and I've used a more modern SD card with an adapter in place of a hard disk, and a small ESP8266 Wi-Fi adapter that I've added to this board. Now, I've done an entire video on how I did this if you're interested, and I'll link it up in the video description. So in this console, we've got a decently spec'd classic Amiga system, but nothing too outrageous, and I mainly use this machine for playing games. It's got enough grunt to do that perfectly, but it isn't crazily overpowered. You know, we've not got an FPGA system or Raspberry Pis as a CPU, nothing like that. It really is a CD32 with a slightly quicker CPU and a bunch of extra RAM. And I've got a keyboard and mouse attached to the machine, and the basic Amiga OS 3.1 from 1993 installed on the SD card as well, so we can boot the machine up and go into the operating system. Now, to watch YouTube on here, we need a couple of pieces of software, and this solution has actually been around for about a year or so, but there was a new version of it released recently, and I figured it was probably about time that I give this a try, and it's a solution called AmiTube. Now, they describe this as the first YouTube client for the classic 68K Amiga. And it looks like in the current version, it's a lot more simple to use and more feature-packed than it was before, so it seemed like a good time for me to give this a go. And AmiTube will take care of finding the YouTube videos and downloading them, but we also need a program to play back the videos as well. Now, for that, we're going to use something called AGA Blaster. And this uses a customized version of the old CDXL format from Commodore that supports the AGA chipset that you find in the CD32 and the Amiga 1200, with 24-bit colors and variable length video frames. Although it does also work with older Amigas like the Amiga 500, only with less on-screen colors. And this solution is still in alpha stage, but development continues and new versions are coming out all the time. So we just grab all the files that we need and then we can get them onto the CD32. And just quickly before we do that, I wanted to take a second to say a big thank you to my sponsor, PCBWay. Now, I'm sure you know PCBWay, massive supporters of the retro community. And if you're working on a project right now, they offer fully featured custom PCB prototyping with low-cost, fast turnaround quality boards. And they do services like 3D printing and injection molding. So get an instant quote for your project right now at PCBWay.com. Okay then, so now we're on the CD32 and you can see that I've downloaded everything we should need to watch YouTube videos onto the SD card. We've got the AGA Blaster program for the CDXL playback and conversion. We've got Riva to play back the MPEG version that we can download, but bearing in mind that Commodore actually released a hardware decoder MPEG card for the CD32 back in the day, I'm not all that convinced that it can manage it in software, but if we get time, I might give it a try. But obviously CDXL is what we're going for mainly. And we've got the main event here, the AmiTube program. Now this is version 1.4 that came out on the 19th of March. It's about a month ago at the time of recording this video. And here we have the main user interface. So looks very straightforward, quite clean. And there are a couple of quick things we need to set up before we can watch YouTube videos on here. Now, if we go to the settings menu and then into prefs, we just need to point the program at the players. So for CDXL, we can click on choose. And as you can see, I've pointed this at the 030 version of AGA Blaster because I've got an 030 CPU in here. And then if you want to do MPEG as well, we point that at the 68K version of Riva. And then there's also a little section here at the top for the file formats and how many colors you want to download the CDXL files in. But one little handy feature about this, you can click on the show all formats checkbox and it will give you pretty much all of them to download and give you an option. So that's all we need to do from here. And now we've got the CD32 connected to the internet already. So we'll search for a YouTube video. Now this one is quite depressingly my most popular video that I've ever uploaded to YouTube. This is where I played back a vinyl record using a £5 banknote. Now this video took me about 30 seconds to film and it's had over 2 million views in the last 5 years on YouTube. You know, I've got some videos that take me 50 hours to produce that get like 10,000 views, but you know, this is what YouTube wants to push to people, so how can I complain? And it's a good example actually because it's quite a short video. And as you can see, it has now given me the search results here, and that top one is my video, uploaded Dan Wood, views 2.3 million. And then it gives me the option of how many colors and the resolution that I want to download this video in. So the CDXL OCS version, that is the one that will play back on the Amiga 500 or the CD-TV, going right up to an 82 megabyte version, which is CDXL AGA+. So we'll give all of these a try and check out the differences. So obviously the 14.5 megabyte version, the smallest file size, let's give that a download first and we'll save it to the RAM disk. You know, we've got 128 megabytes of RAM on here, so there should be room for that. And then it will download and convert the movie to the CDXL OCS file format. Now, at this stage, you might want to go and run yourself a nice warm bath. You might want to go and have dinner, maybe take the dog for a walk, go back to bed for an hour or so, because this is not a quick process. Bearing in mind, it is a 30-year-old console with a 25 megahertz CPU. Even the internet connection is not that quick. So as you can see here, for the lowest resolution and color version of it, the 14 megabyte version, it is going to take around 25 minutes for it to process and download this file. So I will do an edit here and we'll come back when it's finished. Okay then, so a bit of time has passed and through the magic of editing, we can now watch this YouTube video, hopefully, on the Amiga CD32. Now, just for reference, this is what the original video looks like on YouTube, filmed in 1080p on my iPhone a couple of years ago. And now, get ready to have your socks blown off. Let's watch it on the CD32.
So this is a new £5 British banknote that came out about a month ago. These ones are different to the old ones because they're actually made out of plastic.
Now, admittedly, This is not going to rival watching 4K YouTube videos on my PS5 on my 60-inch TV, but for a technology that was developed back in, I think, 1989, the original CDXL spec was written, and this was designed to run on a standard Amiga 500 and CD-TV. I actually think that's quite impressive. You know, you can see the video, you can make out what's going on. It's even got the audio in sync with it as well. It's in color. So that's not bad at all for a first attempt. And obviously, this is the lowest resolution and color depth version of CDXL, but we can now bump it up to the next one, the AGA version.
So this is a new...
And here it is, the AGA version of CDXL. Now, this is the original version that was made for the CD32 and the Amiga 1200. Might be a little bit difficult to see on camera as I'm not doing a direct screen recording on this video, but there is definitely a lot more color in this version of it. I mean, the colors look a lot smoother, even though, again, it is still that quarter screen video. But maybe we can try the AGA Plus version in here and get even more impressive results.
So this is a new £5...
And here it is, the AGA Plus version of this video in CDXL, running in almost full screen on this system, and I think that is really impressive. Again, bearing in mind it's a 30-year-old console, 25 megahertz CPU, you know, we can see all the colors there, the audio's in sync with the video. I mean, it is still quite grainy, but that is definitely watchable. And, you know, had games come out that used video like this back in the day, it would have been pretty mind-blowing. So that does prove that with quite a bit of patience, it is definitely possible to get watchable video. You can watch YouTube on the Amiga CD32 from 1993. So before we wrap this video up, I thought I'd just show you something else that's in development right now and is quite experimental. But what about watching YouTube videos from a web browser and clicking them on there on an Amiga? Well, if we hop onto my Amiga 4000, I can show you something quite interesting on there. This is a new web browser that works like nothing I've seen before on the classic Amiga platform. It's called AmiFox. Now, usually the problem with classic Amiga web browsers is they can't display CSS and, you know, a lot of things that we take for granted in modern websites now. But looking at this, I mean, it looks like we're looking at YouTube on my Amiga 4000. And that is kind of what we're looking at here, the YouTube homepage on my 060 Amiga 4000. So how are we doing this? Well, the way this web browser works is when you go to a website, it sends it off to a remote server. It basically then takes a screenshot of that section of the website, sends it back to the Amiga in its native IFF format, and then it downloads it. But it does mean that you can also interact with it as well. You can click around, play videos, type in text as well. The only thing is, every time you click the mouse, it needs to re-download the screenshot of where it is on screen right now. So as you can see down here at the bottom, I've just scrolled up on this page, loading page, and we get a little progress bar. That does mean that every time you want to do something on a web page, on my connection and on this machine, on an 060 Amiga, which is pretty high end, it generally takes around 20 seconds for anything to show. So obviously that is not really usable in its current state, but I do think it's quite interesting to see this approach being developed on the Amiga. And you can interact with the website as well, so I can search for that same video if I click in there. And 20 seconds later, you can now see a text cursor in the search box, so I can send some text to this remote machine. So we'll search for that same video. Send that text. And now we send a return. And we can now click on the video. And there we see the first frame of the advert that plays before this video. But because AmiFox is actually made by the same guys who made AmiTube, they've actually integrated it into here. So as you can see at the bottom there, it says, this seems to be a YouTube video. Do you want to open it in AmiTube? And then I can click on open in AmiTube, and it will then convert that to a CDXL and play it back on my Amiga 4000. So definitely not an approach for anyone that's in a hurry, and it does feel very cumbersome, but it is quite interesting to see people trying new things and new approaches to get modern technology working on these, 30-year-old Amigas. So there you go. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, watching YouTube on the Amiga. I know I've been absent from YouTube for quite a while, but it is nice to be back making videos again. And there are more of them on the way, I promise. There should be a new video coming up very soon. So thank you for your patience, and I'll see you next time. And just a quick reminder that I do a weekly retro gaming and technology podcast as well, available every Friday from your favourite podcast app. You can search for the Retro Hour podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, all the major platforms. We bring you up to speed on all the big happenings in the world of retro gaming and technology from over the last week. And every episode, we're joined by a special guest, usually a veteran of the video games industry. So get that every single Friday. Check our website at theretrohour.com. And while you're here on YouTube, here are another couple of my videos I think you might enjoy. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.